I didn't expect a forgotten child in a dark, empty theatre to completely rewrite my life. When his billionaire alpha father finally burst through the heavy velvet doors, his frantic scent, choking the air, his voice literally broke as he whispered a desperate, "Thank you." But that stormy night was just the beginning of our tangled nightmare. The rain was coming down in sheets, hammering against the stained glass facade of the grand, majestic cinema. I was the night manager, an unbonded Omega, named Liam, tasked with closing up the historic building. It was 1:45 a.m., and the last midnight screening of a forgotten black and white classic had ended nearly an hour ago. The ushers had already clocked out, leaving me alone with the hum of the ancient ventilation system and the smell of stale popcorn. I grabbed my flashlight and a trash bag, pushing open the heavy double doors to Theatre 4 for a final sweep. That was when I caught it. Beneath the lingering odor of artificial butter and damp wool, there was a scent that made my breath hitch. It was faint, but unmistakably the scent of a distressed pup, sour milk fear, and a sharp metallic tang of an unfledged alpha lineage. My Omega instincts, usually suppressed beneath layers of scent blockers, and professional detachment flared to life instantly. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, panning across the rows of red velvet seats until it stopped on the front row. There curled into a tight, trembling ball beneath a discarded oversized coat was a little boy. He couldn't have been older than 5. I rushed down the carpeted aisle, dropping the trash bag. "Hey there." I kept my voice soft, a low rumble meant to soothe. "It's okay. You're safe." The boy flinched, pulling the coat tighter around himself. He had dark, messy hair and large, tear-filled blue eyes that looked at me with absolute terror. The sheer panic rolling off his scent glands made my own chest ache. Without thinking, I knelt on the sticky floor, consciously lowering my scent blocker patch just enough to let my natural pheromones leak out. I focused on projecting warmth, a soft, sweet aroma of chamomile and warm honey. Slowly the boy's rigid posture relaxed. His little nose twitched, picking up my scent, and a pathetic, broken whimper escaped his lips. Nanny said to wait here," he whispered, his voice trembling. "She said we were playing hide-and-seek, but she didn't come back." Rage boiled in my gut. What kind of monster leaves a pup in a dark, freezing theatre in the middle of the city? I stripped off my own cardigan and wrapped it around his small shoulders, pulling him into my arms. He buried his face into the crook of my neck, right over my scent gland, inhaling deeply and clinging to my shirt like a lifeline. "My name is Liam," I murmured, rubbing his back. "What's yours, sweetheart?" "Leo." He mumbled into my collarbone. I carried Leo to the manager's office. The storm outside had knocked out the main phone lines, and my cell phone had barely 1 bar of service in the thick, concrete-walled building. I managed to wrap him in a heavy fleece blanket I kept in my locker, creating a makeshift nest on the worn leather sofa. I gave him a cup of warm water and sat beside him, letting him anchor himself to my scent. As the minutes ticked by, I debated running out into the storm to flag down a police cruiser, but I couldn't bear to take Leo out into the freezing downpour. At exactly 2:34 a.m., the heavy glass front doors of the cinema didn't just open, they practically exploded inward. The sound of shattering glass and heavy boots echoed through the empty lobby. I jumped up instinctively, stepping in front of the office door to shield Leo. The scent that flooded the building was paralyzing. It was an alpha's pheromones dialed up to a lethal, suffocating intensity. It smelled of dark, petrichor-crushed pine needles and pure, unadulterated violence. The air pressure in the room literally dropped. "Where is he?" A voice roared, a baritone that shook the dust from the rafters. I cracked the office door open, stepping out into the lobby. Standing there drenched in rain chest heaving was Richard van der Beek. Even in my secluded life, I knew who he was. CEO of Vanguard Logistics, a ruthless billionaire alpha who had recently orchestrated a highly publicized, ruthless corporate takeover of a rival shipping conglomerate. He was flanked by 2 massive beta security guards, but Richard himself looked like a man torn apart. His custom Tom Ford suit was soaked, his tie ripped away, and his eyes were completely bloodshot. "Mr. van der Beek." I spoke up, forcing my voice to remain steady, despite the primal urge to submit to his overwhelming scent. His head snapped toward me. His amber eyes locked onto mine, and for a terrifying second I thought he was going to tear my throat out. He stalked toward me, a predator closing in on prey. But then he stopped dead in his tracks. He blinked, the feral aggression in his eyes, wavering as he inhaled the air around me. He was smelling Leo's scent on my clothes, perfectly interwoven with my own calming chamomile. "Is he?" Richard's voice, previously a thunderclap, was suddenly paper-thin. I pushed the office door open wider. "He's safe. He's right here." Richard bypassed me, dropping to his knees on the carpet beside the leather sofa. When Leo saw him, the boy burst into fresh tears, throwing himself into his father's arms. "Daddy!" The imposing, terrifying alpha completely collapsed. He buried his face in his son's neck, breathing in his scent, to assure himself the pup was real whole and safe. I watched from the doorway as the billionaire's broad shoulders shook with silent sobs. The oppressive, violent petrichor scent in the room instantly dissolved, replaced by a profound, agonizing relief that made tears prick my own eyes. After several long minutes, Richard gently pulled back, wiping his son's tears before standing up. He turned to face me. The formidable CEO mask was gone. He looked like a shattered man, piecing himself back together. He took a step toward me, and to my absolute shock, his voice shook violently. I was at a closed-door dinner with executives from Bain Capital. My phone was off. I didn't know. He swallowed hard, his amber eyes dropping to my cardigan, still wrapped around his son. "Thank you. God thank you for staying with him." 3 days passed after that night. I returned to my quiet, invisible life, sweeping up popcorn and dealing with rude teenagers, assuming my brief collision with the upper echelon of society was over. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday afternoon when a sleek, armored black Maybach pulled up to the curb of my cramped apartment building in the outer boroughs. I was walking out carrying a bag of laundry when the tinted window rolled down. Richard van der Beek sat in the back, looking immaculate but exhausted. The dark circles under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights. "Liam," he said, his deep voice sending an involuntary shiver down my spine. "Get in, please." I hesitated, clutching my laundry basket. "Mr. van der Beek, I have a shift in 2 hours." "I've already bought the cinema," he stated flatly, as if discussing the weather. "You don't work there anymore. I need your help, and I am willing to compensate you beyond your wildest imagination. Just get in the car." Stunned, I abandoned my laundry in my apartment and slid into the plush leather interior of the Maybach. The moment the door closed, I was enveloped in his scent. It was controlled now, a sophisticated blend of cedar and rain, but beneath it lay a vibrating current of anxiety. "It's Leo," Richard explained, rubbing his temples as the car merged into traffic. "Since that night he hasn't spoken a word to me. He barely eats. He wakes up screaming and his scent is constantly sour. The doctors say it's severe trauma, but—" Richard paused, his jaw clenching. He turned to look at me, his alpha gaze intense and searching. "He won't let go of your sweater. He refuses to sleep without it. My scent isn't calming him down. He needs an Omega, Liam. He needs you." I felt a tug at my heartstrings. Where is his other parent? Surely his Omega mother or father. Richard's expression hardened into a mask of pure ice. His mother, a beta, passed away during childbirth. It's always just been Leo and me. I hired the best nannies, the best security, but I failed him. We arrived at a towering glass skyscraper in the financial district. The private elevator shot us up to the penthouse. The moment I stepped out into the sprawling minimalist apartment, a profound sadness washed over me. It was beautiful, filled with modern art and expensive furniture, but it was completely devoid of warmth. There was no nesting area, no soft edges. It was an alpha's fortress, cold and unyielding. I found Leo in a massive, sterile bedroom. He was curled up in the center of a king-sized bed, clutching my cheap, worn cardigan to his chest. His eyes were hollow. When he saw me, he didn't smile, but he immediately sat up, reaching his little arms out. I rushed over, climbing onto the bed and pulling him into a tight embrace. I let my scent bloom, fully filling the cold room with the aroma of warm honey and chamomile. Leo buried his face in my chest, and for the first time in days, he let out a long, shuddering breath. I felt the rigid tension in his muscles melt away. I started humming a low, rumbling lullaby, rocking him gently. When I finally looked up, Richard was standing in the doorway. He was staring at us, an unreadable expression on his face. His chest rose and fell heavily, and the scent of cedar in the room suddenly warmed, mixing with my own in a way that made my pulse race. There was an intimacy in the air that felt dangerous. Later that evening, after Leo had finally eaten a full bowl of soup and fallen into a peaceful sleep, Richard called me into his study. The room was lined with mahogany bookshelves and overlooked the glittering city skyline. He poured 2 glasses of aged scotch, sliding one across the heavy oak desk to me. I had my private investigators look into the nanny who abandoned him. Richard said, his voice deadly quiet. Her name was Sarah. She had been with us for 6 months. Impeccable references. But she didn't just leave him there by accident, Liam. He turned a laptop around to face me. On the screen was a bank statement. 3 days before the incident, a sum of $2 million was wired to an offshore account in her name. The shell company that sent the money traces back to a firm called Atkinson Holdings. I frowned, the name sounding vaguely familiar from the financial news. Who are they? A proxy. Richard snarled, his alpha pheromones spiking with sudden aggression. They're a front for Nathaniel Reed, my ex-brother-in-law. When my wife died, Nathaniel blamed me. He believed I prioritized my empire over her health. He swore he would take everything I loved. A cold chill ran down my spine. He paid the nanny to leave Leo in the theater. Why, not just to leave him, Richard said, stepping around the desk to stand incredibly close to me. His physical presence was overwhelming a tidal wave of heat and power. Leo was supposed to be picked up by Nathaniel's people. They were going to smuggle him out of the country to leverage my company. The storm delayed their extraction team. You being there. You hiding him in your office. You didn't just comfort my son Liam. You saved him from being kidnapped. I stared at him, my heart hammering against my ribs. This wasn't just a case of a negligent employee. We were standing in the middle of a vicious, high-stakes war. Richard reached out his large, calloused hand, hovering just inches from my cheek. I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. Nathaniel knows his plan failed. Richard whispered, his amber eyes dropping to my lips before meeting my gaze again. And my security detail found out something else today. Nathaniel knows exactly who foiled his plan. He knows your name, Liam. The revelation dropped the temperature in the study to freezing. I was a simple theater manager, an Omega who bought off-brand suppressants and ate instant ramen, and suddenly I was the target of a billionaire's vengeful ex-brother-in-law. "I can't go back to my apartment," I whispered, the reality crashing over me like a physical weight. "No, you can't," Richard replied, his voice a low, gravelly hum that vibrated in my chest. "As of 10 minutes ago, my head of security, Gregory Pierce, dispatched a team to pack up your belongings. The lease on your apartment has been terminated. You are staying here under my protection until Nathaniel Reed is dismantled." I wanted to argue, to demand my autonomy, but the alpha pheromones saturating the air, a heavy protective blanket of cedar and petrichor, were short-circuiting my brain. My inner Omega was practically purring at the prospect of being shielded by such a powerful alpha. Worse, when I thought of little Leo waking up and not finding me there, my heart broke. I nodded slowly. For the next 3 weeks, the penthouse became a gilded cage. It was a fortress equipped with biometric scanners, bulletproof glass, and a rotation of heavily armed guards from Pierce and Brother Security, a private military firm. I spent my days homeschooling Leo, painting with him in the sunroom, and slowly coaxing the vibrant, happy pup out from beneath his trauma. He started smiling again. He started calling me Lee. But while Leo healed, Richard deteriorated. The corporate war with Nathaniel Reed was escalating. Richard was ruthlessly liquidating assets, using his leverage with executives at Morgan Stanley and J.P. Morgan to aggressively short-sell Nathaniel's dummy corporations. He was burning the candle at both ends, returning to the penthouse at 3 a.m., smelling of stale, coffee-burnt ozone, and an undercurrent of raw, suppressed violence. The stress was triggering something primal in him. I could smell it before he even realized it. The sharp, bitter tang of an impending stress-induced rut. It happened on a Friday night. A torrential downpour was lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, mirroring the night we first met. Leo was fast asleep in his room. I was in the kitchen brewing a cup of chamomile tea, wearing an oversized cashmere sweater Richard had casually discarded and let me claim. The private elevator pinged. The doors slid open, and the scent hit me so hard my knees actually buckled. It wasn't just cedar and rain anymore. It was a suffocating, intoxicating wave of pure, unfiltered alpha heat. It smelled like crushed pine dark spices, and a predatory hunger that made my pulse roar in my ears. The teacup slipped from my trembling fingers, shattering on the marble floor. Richard staggered into the foyer. He had torn his tie off his dress shirt, unbuttoned, to reveal the heavy rise and fall of his chest. His amber eyes, usually so calculating and cold, were blown wide, the pupils dilated until they were almost entirely black. A low, guttural growl vibrated from his throat as he locked eyes with me. "Liam!" He rasped his voice, sounding like it was torn from vocal cords lined with sandpaper. He was in full rut, the biological frenzy that overtook an alpha, completely stripping away their rational mind and leaving only the instinct to claim, to mate, to possess. Usually billionaires like Richard had pristine clinical facilities and paid Omega escorts to weather these storms. But the stress had pushed his cycle forward by months right here in the penthouse. With me, my own biology betrayed me instantly. My scent blockers, already weakening from weeks of proximity to him, failed completely. A thick, sweet cloud of warm honey and jasmine poured from my scent glands, answering his call. "Richard, wait!" I gasped, backing up against the marble island as he stalked toward me. Every step he took felt like a physical blow of heat. "You need to call your medical team. You're not thinking straight." "I am thinking perfectly," he growled, closing the distance in a blur of motion. He didn't touch me, but he trapped me against the counter, caging me in with his massive arms. He buried his face in my neck, inhaling my scent, so deeply his chest shuddered. "You smell like mine. You smell like my home, Liam. It's the rut." I whimpered my hands, coming up to press weakly against his chest. His heart was hammering against my palms like a jackhammer. "You don't want this. I have wanted this since the moment I saw you in that theatre shielding my son." Richard confessed, his lips grazing my jawline, sending electric shocks down my spine. "I've been drowning for years, Liam. Nathaniel, the company, the empty house. You're the only thing that lets me breathe. Let me breathe you." The vulnerability beneath the ferocious alpha dominance broke me. My protests melted into a soft, yielding sigh. I tilted my head back, baring the sensitive skin of my scent gland to him. With a triumphant, possessive groan, Richard swept me into his arms, carrying me toward his master suite as the storm raged on outside. That night, the cold, sterile penthouse was finally filled with the warmth it had been missing as two fractured souls collided in the dark. I woke up 2 days later, tangled in expensive silk sheets that smelled overwhelmingly of us. My body ached in a way that was entirely new, but deeply satisfying. The heavy, frenzied fog of the rut had lifted, leaving behind a profound sense of clarity. Richard was sitting on the edge of the bed, already dressed in a dark, tactical turtleneck, his posture rigid. "Good morning," I murmured, my voice raspy. He turned, and the absolute adoration in his amber eyes made my breath catch. He leaned down, pressing a reverent kiss to my forehead. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I lost control. I never wanted to force that on you." "You didn't force anything," I promised, reaching up to trace his jaw. "I'm right where I want to be." Before he could respond, his secure cell phone buzzed. Richard answered it, and I watched the warmth instantly drain from his face, replaced by a terrifying, lethal mask. "When?" he barked into the phone. "Lock down the building. No one gets in or out." He hung up, turning to me with a look of pure dread. Nathaniel just made a public filing to seize Vanguard Logistics. But that's a distraction. Gregory Pierce just found a wiretap in my private server room. Nathaniel didn't just hire a bad nanny, Liam. He has a mole inside my inner circle. Someone with top-tier security clearance. My blood ran cold. "Who?" "Christopher Langdon." Richard said, his voice dripping with venom. Christopher was the vice president of Vanguard, a beta who had been Richard's closest confidant for a decade. He was the only one besides the security chief who knew the override codes for the penthouse. Suddenly, the heavy reinforced door of the master suite hissed open. Standing in the doorway, holding a suppressed, sleek black handgun, was Christopher Langdon. He looked pale, sweating profusely, but his hand was deadly steady. Behind him, 2 rogue mercenaries stood guard in the hallway. The penthouse's internal alarms had been completely disabled. "I'm sorry, Richard," Christopher said, his voice trembling slightly. "Nathaniel promised me the CEO position, and he promised to wipe out my gambling debts in Macau. I just need the boy. If you touch my son—" Richard roared, his alpha pheromones exploding outward with such concussive force that one of the mercenaries actually stumbled back. "I will tear your spine from your body." "The boy is at his art class in the West Wing," Christopher said tightly. "My men are fetching him now, and I'm taking the Omega-2 as insurance." Panic clawed at my throat. Leo. They were going to take Leo. A fierce, completely irrational Omega instinct flared inside me. I wasn't just a theater manager anymore. I was part of this pack. I looked at Richard. His muscles were coiled like a spring, calculating the distance between himself and the gun. He needed a distraction. I didn't think. I screamed, grabbing the heavy brass lamp from the nightstand, and hurled it directly at Christopher's head. The lamp shattered against the doorframe. Christopher flinched his gun, wavering for a fraction of a second. That was all Richard needed. He moved with terrifying, blinding speed. The billionaire CEO vanished, replaced by an apex predator. He tackled Christopher to the ground, the gun clattering across the hardwood floor. The two mercenaries raised their weapons, but before they could fire, the glass windows of the hallway shattered inward as Gregory Pierce and his loyal security team rappelled down from the roof, breaching the penthouse. Chaos erupted. Gunfire popped, but it was over in seconds. Pierce's men neutralized the mercenaries. Richard had Christopher pinned to the floor, his hand wrapped around the traitor's throat, his eyes blazing with a golden, murderous light. "Richard, stop!" I yelled, scrambling out of bed and running to him. "He's not worth it, Leo. We need to check on Leo." The mention of his son snapped Richard out of his bloodlust. He dropped Christopher in disgust, letting Pierce's men drag the sobbing traitor away. Richard turned to me, pulling me into a bone-crushing embrace. We ran down the hall to the west wing together. Leo was hiding under a heavy oak desk in the library, his hands over his ears. When he saw us, he sprinted across the room, throwing himself into our arms. We collapsed onto the floor in a tangled pile of limbs, breathing heavily, our scents mixing into a frantic, relieved harmony of cedar honey and the sweet milk scent of the pup. "I've got you," Richard choked out, burying his face in Leo's hair, then pulling me tight against his side. "I've got you both. It's over." That night, after the police had left, and Nathaniel Reed had been arrested by federal agents on charges of corporate espionage and attempted kidnapping, Richard and I sat on the balcony watching the city lights. He pulled me into his lap, his large hands resting on my waist. "You risked your life today," he murmured, tracing the line of my neck. "You fought for my son. For me." "He's our son," I corrected softly, looking deep into his amber eyes. Richard's breath hitched. Without another word, he leaned down his lips, brushing against the sensitive skin over my scent gland. I bared my neck willingly, my heart soaring. I felt the sharp prick of his teeth, followed by a rush of heat and profound, unbreakable connection as he bit down, claiming me. The bite sealed our bond, intertwining our souls and scents forever. The forgotten Omega from the empty theater was finally exactly where he belonged, the heart of the billionaire's pack. And that's the epic finale. From a forgotten pup in an empty theater to a high-stakes corporate war, Liam proved that a fierce Omega will do anything to protect his alpha and his pack. If this twist-filled, steamy Omegaverse drama kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button. Right now, don't forget to share this with your BL-loving friends and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another intense, heart-pounding romance story. See you in the next video.